Okay, guys, it is part 5. This is our final portion of our notes recordings for World War II. Thank goodness. Okay. If you're still here, great. Thanks for being along for the ride. It's awesome. I don't know whether you were just bored or you actually wanted to learn this stuff, but regardless, I appreciate you and your life choices. Let's go. There we go. Okay, so immediately after World War II is concluded, because remember, we talked about it before, Germany surrendered, Japan surrendered, we're moving on with stuff. We are going to have the Nuremberg trials. This is a series of trials where we are putting Nazi officials on trial for all of the war crimes that they committed during World War II, including the actions taken during the Holocaust. Now, the judges and prosecution are going to be from the Allied countries. The defense attorneys are Germans, and they're not going to prosecute as many people as you would expect. Many Nazis, seeing that they were on the brink of surrender or that they were going to lose, fled from Germany, ran away. Many of them going to South America, places like Brazil, Argentina. And some of you may be wondering, because you saw a ridiculous documentary, no, Hitler was not amongst their number. He had already killed himself. But there are going to be some Nazis who escape. And then later on, after World War II, there are basically Jewish bounty hunters that go and search for secret Nazis and try to take them out. It's kind of fascinating. Now, people who were convicted, found guilty of crimes, were sentenced anywhere from 15 years in prison to a death sentence. There was a lot of variation there. Some people feeling that they deserved more punishment than they got. It kind of was controversial at the time. Now, World War II did a number on Europe. Really destroyed a lot of stuff around the world, but really in Europe they had a hard time. There was a lot of bombings that destroyed complete cities. This over here is an image of Dresden, Germany, just to give you an idea of how little was left after all of the Allied bombings of Germany. So we need a plan for how to rebuild Europe and help them kind of get back on their feet after the war is over. This plan is going to be named after General Marshall, who comes up with it. Basically, the plan boils down to giving Europe a bunch of money in aid so that they can rebuild. Another reason why the United States is doing this is not just to be a good buddy, it's also because they're afraid that if Europe is going through a hard time, they are going to be inspired to follow the path of the Soviet Union and become communist and spread the ideology of communism into Western Europe, and they don't want that to happen. Now, Germany, of course, has now lost 2 world wars in a row, but unlike World War I, we're not going to go out of our way to punish Germany because we know that that did not work the first time. So we're going to divide Germany and the capital city of Berlin between the 4 allied nations, and they each are going to get their own section they control. So we have a British section, a French section, an American section, and a Soviet section. Now, very, very weirdly, Berlin is over here in the Soviet section, but is also going to be divided into 4. So you can see that little spot of blue, little spot of green, little spot of yellow. Those are the British, French, and American sections of Berlin, which is surrounded by the Soviet Union. This is not a recipe for success, and we will talk about that more later during the Cold War. So they each are going to get sectors. Now, eventually it's separated by each country, but over time they decide that's too complicated. And all of these 3 sections here are going to become part of what it will be West Germany, a democratic capitalist nation that becomes a major economic power. They bounced back from World War II really quickly with the support of those 3 allied nations. The eastern sector, as you might have guessed, becomes known as East Germany, and it's going to be communist and under complete Soviet control. Again, with the funny pictures, feel free to just pause if you want to look at it longer or move along, whatever you want to do. Now, Japan is also, similar to Germany, going to be controlled by an allied force. But however, unlike Germany, only the United States is going to be in Japan. So Japan becomes completely under American control under General MacArthur, shown here. This is Emperor Hirohito. And we are going to help Japan write a new democratic constitution. They are going to have their military severely limited, but the offside of that is that the United States says you don't need a military because if anybody threatens you, we have your back. We are protecting you. We are going to provide military support. And that's still in effect to this day. That is why the United States has a very large military base in Japan. Japan also going to become a dominant economy in Asia after World War II. They are going to become this huge manufacturing power by the 1960s and 70s. So during that time period in the 60s and 70s, that's when everybody joked about how everything was made in Japan because China hadn't caught up to that level of manufacturing yet. It's not until like the 80s and 90s that people start to talk about China is where everything is made. Also, after World War II, we are going to create the United Nations because the League of Nations sucked. It didn't work. We're going to create a newer, better version. So, this again is to promote international cooperation and try to avoid going to war when we have difficulties with each other. The United Nations has initially 51 member states. Today, it has over 100. I'm not sure how many countries are part of it today, but it's real big. And a 5-member Security Council. That is the same today as well. The 5 members of the Security Council have not changed, and they all have total veto power. And their members include China, France, the United States, Russia, or at that time the Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom. And the United Nations is going to publish a document that they call the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And it's basically a list of human rights that all of us, no matter where you live in the world, should have protected for you. The idea being that your government would provide and protect those rights. Many countries in the world do not. They ignore the fact that this document exists, but it's trying to set a baseline expectation for what human beings' lives should look like across the world. Things like freedom of speech, protection of property, preservation of your life and being safe, things like that. NATO is going to be a new alliance system called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization that is going to be established in the late 1940s. It's called NATO for the North Atlantic because we have both North American countries like Canada and the United States involved and countries in Western Europe. We're looking at mostly capitalist nations here, largely democratic. Now, the Cold War is going to pick up because now we have Team NATO, the green countries over here, including what's on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. But the Warsaw Pact is going to be created as well because they're mad that they don't really get invited to NATO and they don't want to be left out of stuff. So they create their own communist organization in Central and Eastern Europe. This also is going to be a much more controlling alliance organization because, unlike NATO, the Soviet Union has military control over all of the Warsaw Pact nations. They can pretty much control whatever's going on over there. This also is symbolically going to be referred to as the Iron Curtain. That's a term coined by Winston Churchill, but he basically says there's this dividing line that I'm trying to show here with my cursor. I don't know if that makes any sense to you. That separates Western Europe from Eastern Europe, the capitalist West from the communist East, and that we can't really see what's beyond that Iron Curtain. It's sort of mysterious to us. So, the beginnings of the Cold War, as we said before, the world is getting divided between countries that are pretty much either picking Team USA or Team Soviet Union because those are the two superpowers that come out of World War II. And this eventually turns into a conflict that we call the Cold War. And when we eventually talk more in detail about the Cold War, because again, it's a conflict that lasts for over 50 years, there's a lot to talk about, I will explain why they call it a Cold War and all of those other fun details. And that's it, guys. Now we're done. Thanks for paying attention and looking at all this stuff, and I will let you know when I have more stuff for you.